we'll need to first of all delete everything that we have in our file. So I'll hit A, X, delete. Then we're going to add a sphere, so I'll hit Shift A and we'll go to Mesh and I'll choose UV sphere. Then I'll go to the sphere settings on the bottom left. Then I'll increase these segments. So I'll make them, let's say, 90. And then for the rings, I could go to, let's say, 70. The reason I'm using such a high number is because I want to avoid any like pinching at the top if we use a low number of segments and rings. So using a high number will help us mitigate that. And then for the radius, I'm going to want this to be in real life scale. So the real life size of a lollipop is 0.0127 meters. It's going to be like really small. Then on the numerical keypad, I can click on the numpad to zoom in. Then I can select this sphere, right click, shade smooth. Then we can create the stick for the lollipop. So I can tab in and we can create the stick quite easily. We can extract an edge from here, or we can just use a cylinder, but I think I'll extract an edge. So before I extract that edge, you'll notice if I zoom in, there's some weird result that we're getting. So we'll need to get rid of this, or rather to fix it. So on this right hand side, we have item tool and we have view. So go to view and under view, adjust the clip start. So I'll just reduce it to the minimum, which is 0.001 meters. Then I want to select these faces here. So I will hit 3 on the keyboard. Then I'll click off. Then I'll click and drag to select these faces. Then I can switch my view to, let's say, the front view. See if this is enough. Probably not. So I need to add on to this selection. So I can hit 3, hold down Alt Shift and click on one of these faces so that it kind of adds to our selection. Then I can switch to front again, and then I can hit Z and I'll choose wireframe. Then I'll hit E to extrude. Then I'll drag this up, right? Then I will hit S, Z, 0 and enter so that I flatten this. Then I can move it further up, so GZ. So here we have like a really huge face, as you can see. So what I can do is I can hit Ctrl R to add a few edge loops like so. So I've added 3. So if I undo this, so Ctrl R, and then you'll see if you hover over any of these faces, you'll see that you get an edge loop. But of course, this is just a hypothetical one because I'm yet to accept it. So I can hit I can adjust my middle mouse, the scroll wheel, to increase the edge loops. So if I drag up, I'm increasing the edge loops. I drag down, I'm reducing the edge loops. So I just want to add, let's say 3 or 4, maybe let's say 4. Then I can click to accept. So you can double click to accept. Then of course you'll have your settings where you can come in and increase the number of cuts. So you still have that freedom even after you click and accept. So 4 is fine for me. Then I want this edge loop here. So I'll select this edge. So I'm in edge mode. So I'll select this edge, click Alt, and then click that edge so that it selects the edge loop. Then what I want to do is I want to duplicate this edge loop. So I'll hit Shift D to duplicate, then click to accept. Then I will click on my spacebar to search. So I'll search for separate. Then I'll choose separate by selection. Once I choose separate by selection, on the top right here where we have the collections, you'll see we have the sphere, and then we have sphere.001. Sphere.001 is the edge loop. Currently, we're still in the spheres. You can see with this small square with another small square that is highlighted. So we're still in edit mode. So I can exit edit mode. So I can tab out. Then I can go to the front view. So I've hit my tilde key. Then I'll hit Z, wireframe. Then I'll select this sphere.001. Then I'll move it up. So G, Z, right? Like so. Then I'll tab in. I'll hit 2. 2 is for edges. Then I'll hit A, so it selects all the edges. Then I'll hit E to extrude. Then I'll move this down. Then I'll hit Z to kind of accept that, or rather to move it on the Z axis, not to accept, but to move it on the Z axis. Then of course with this selected, I can continue just hitting G to move. I'm just zooming out because I want to see how long I want this to be. So G, Z, so maybe that point, right? So then I know this is very like high resolution, which is unnecessary, but like I said, you can create a like the stick for the lollipop using a cylinder. So I feel like this is not, I don't think this is necessary to have this high of a resolution. So let's just use a cylinder. So I've just deleted that. So I'll hit Shift A, and then we'll go to mesh, and I'll use a cylinder. And for this, I'll reduce the radius, something smaller, maybe 0.002. Maybe lower than that. So I'll hit Shift so that I go to a lower value. But then once it gets to 0.001, kind of stops. So I'll just increase it a bit. Then I'll use the front view. Hit Z, wireframe. Then I can now reduce the value. But you don't have to do it here. You can actually just go to edit mode and do it. So let me reduce the vertices. So that is a bit much. Let's do, let's say, 16. Then the depth is again a lot, so let's do that. Then I'll move it, so GZ, right? It's still quite large, as you can see, compared to this extrusion that I created. So we can hit the tab key. I'll hit A to select everything, then S to scale, and it's scaling in a strange way. So I'll hit S. You can see it's scaling from the center of the object. So with this, you'll have to kind of zoom out so that you can see what's happening. So I'll hit S, zoom out, then S again, then G, then Z, move this up, then S, then GZ. Okay, so something like that. Then I can hit S again actually. So I'm not choosing a particular axis where I should scale this on. I want all the axes to be considered, the X, the Y, and the Z. So I'm not specifying, is it the X, is it the Y, is it the Z? It's in all axes. Then I'll hit Z, solid. Then we have this, right? So if you wanted to have a hole, we can delete this face. So I can hit the backslash to isolate. Go to 3, select this face, come to the top here, hit Shift, select that, X, delete faces. And then for this, we'll have to use the solidify, of course. So before I do that, we can add a few edge loops. So Control R, then I'll just add a few. And again, we still have the option to add as we like, right? So I'm adding them just to have the structure maintain itself if I choose to smooth this particular object. So I'll tab out, I'll right click, shade smooth, then I'll click on the backslash to exit isolation. Then I'm going to go to the modifiers and I will add under generate, we can add a solidify, and it's quite large. So I'll reduce the thickness. So I'll hold down Shift and drag. So let me start with 0.002. It's also quite large. So let's do 0.0002. So this works fine. So let's do 0.0025. 0.000025. Yeah, so there are 3 zeros. And then of course this looks a bit of a mess. So shade smooth. So I can tab in. Then I can add an edge loop here. So Control R, click and drag up to that point. And if I tab out, it stops looking strange in a way. I can go into isolation mode and do the same for the other side. Although we're not going to see it, I'm just going to do the same. So Control R, click and drag, right? Then I can exit isolation. Then we can actually add a shade smooth, or rather subdivision surface, because we're already using shade smooth. So I'll add a subdivision surface and I'll lower the resolution both in the viewport and the render to 1 and 1. And that's fine. Then I'll go back to this sphere. Then I'll tab into it. Then we'll go to the front view. So I want to create that area that kind of extrudes a bit from this section. So I'll hit Z, wireframe. Then I'll hit 3. Then I will click and drag, select the faces that I need. So I'll hold on Shift right now to add to my selection. Okay. Then I can hit Z, solid. Then I'm going to extrude this. So I'll hit Alt E. When you hit Alt E, you'll get the extrude settings. So I'll choose extrude faces along normals. So I'll click on that, then I'll drag slightly. Then once I'm satisfied, I'll click to accept. Remember, if you want to make a subtle change, hold down Shift. Then I want to scale this a bit. I want to squish it a bit, so I'll hit SZ and just scale it down a bit. So I'll hit Shift and just make a slight change, something like that. Then I'll tab out. Then of course with this you can add a subdivision surface. So if you go to the modifiers, you can add a subdivision surface just to make it look a bit better. Then I'll lower the levels in the viewport and in the render to 1 and 1, right? So if I tab in, and actually I can deactivate this in edit mode, the subdivision surface. So click on this icon, and then you can choose to add edge loops, for example. So if you wanted this to be a bit harder, you can add edge loops to it or bevel the edge loop. So that's something you can do, but I'm not going to do it. I think this is fine. It's a simple object. I don't want to overthink it. Then of course, finally, you need to rename your objects. So this is the stick, and this is the lollipop. Okay. So now that we have this, the asset is complete, I'd say. Maybe the final thing we could do is organize, probably. So I'll hit Shift A, and then we'll add an empty, and I'll add a plain axis. And I'll come to the left-hand side, bottom left, and I'll reduce the radius, so something small, like so. Then I will select this stick, hold on Shift, select the lollipop. Then I will switch to the front view. Then I'll hit GZ, this up, thereabout. Okay, so again GZ, move it. Then I want to parent the lollipop and the stick to this particular empty. So I'll select the lollipop, select the stick. So I'm holding now Shift. Then finally, I'll select the empty and then Control P to parent. Then I'll choose Object, Keep Transform. Now click on that. Then we have the parenting happening. So now I just need to select the empty, hit G, and I can move it, right? So then I'll rename this empty to maybe lollipop asset, and there we have our lollipop. Now that we've set up the scene, what we can do is we can start setting it up for lighting. So before we light, we need a camera. So I'm going to set up a camera. So I'll hit Shift A. I'm going to go to camera. Then I want this to be my view. So I'll hit Control Alt 0, and that should make whatever I had framed to be my camera view. But now we have an issue whereby I cannot see whatever it is that I had framed. So that's an issue that is now within the camera itself. So if I select the camera, then we go to the camera settings, we have the clip start for the camera. So we had changed the clip start for the view. So now we need to change the clip start for the camera. So I'll reduce this, and now we have our lollipop, right? Then what I'm going to do next is in this view setting, this view window, we're going to turn on camera to view, and then I'll go to the render properties, and I will change the render engine from Eevee to cycles. I'll change the device from CPU to GPU compute. Then in the sampling, in the viewport, I'll change the maximum samples to 256. And in the render, I'll change the maximum samples to 256 as well. Then I'll go to the output. And here I'm going to set the resolution to be 1000 pixels by 1000 pixels. That's on the X and the Y. Now that we have the camera to view set up, or rather now that we have the camera to view active, I can click on this hand icon, and then we can now start framing. So that's what I want. So this is just to help me light. Okay. Then once you're satisfied with your framing, turn off camera to view, back to item. Then I need to select the empty, and then I can hit Shift A, and then we can go to light and look for 3-point lighting. So this is an add-on I'm using that I've already installed. If I go to edit, preferences, add-ons, it is Try Lighting. So you can find it on extensions.blender.org. You just need to search for Try Lighting, download it, and then you come and install it. When you click on this drop down, you choose install from disk. It should allow you to go to your drive, select the file, install. Okay. Then now that we have selected this, I'll just hit Shift A. Then we go to light, 3-point lighting. Then I'll get into the camera view. I'll go to the render view. So to go to the render, I'll hit Z, rendered, or I can go at the top here where I have these overlays and click on viewport shading rendered. So this is what I have currently. Then I'll split my view into two. So I'll come at the bottom here and just hover. Make sure you get the crosshairs, then click and hold and drag, right? So don't click off so that these settings don't disappear. Okay, so I want to have two views so that we can see what the renderer is showing, and we can also see how the lights have been placed in the scene. So I want to adjust the lighting for this. So I'll start by adjusting the height. So they're way too far away and the object is quite tiny. So I'll bring them down, let's say to somewhere here. Okay, so I'm just eyeballing. Then I'll reduce the distance as well. Okay, so I'll reduce the distance, then reduce the height again, then reduce the distance. So now it becomes really overexposed. Then we need to adjust the base energy. So 100 watts is too much for us. So I could make it, let's say 10. Then I can hit enter. Then I can go a bit lower as well. Maybe let's say 5. And I think this is fine. Then we can make our own adjustments, right? So now I can click off and the settings for the 3-point lighting will disappear. So I'll do a bit of cleanup. So I'll select the key fill. So I'll just hold on Shift. Then finally the camera, I'll hold on Control and click on it. Then I'll hit M and I'll say new collection. And I'll call this collection render. Then I'll click on create so that they're in their own separate collection. Then I'll turn the lights off, all of them, both in the viewport for the eye and the camera icon that represents the render. So I'll turn on the key, and then I will start adjusting the settings for the key. So with the key light selected, I'll go to the light settings and I'll adjust the power. So 5 was fine, so I'm not going to go beyond that. Then we have the size, so I'll reduce the size. And if you reduce the size, you notice that the intensity comes a bit much. But if the size is bigger, then the light diffuses more, it spreads out further, right? While when it's small, it does not spread out as much. So just make it small like that. Then for this, I'll need to reduce the size. So I'll set it maybe to like 2. Not the size, sorry, the power. I'll set it to 2. Then I'll reveal the fill and I'll check where it is. So for the fill, the power is more than the key because the key is 2 and the fill is 2.5, and that's not how it should be. Usually the fill is less brighter than the key, so I'll need to make this, let's say 1.5 maybe, or 1.2. Then I can turn this on and off. So the main purpose of the fill is to fill in the shadows that are created by the key. Then I'll go to the top view and see that placement. So we can also reduce its size as well. So reduce its size. Then I'll turn it on, turn it off. Yeah. Then we have the backlight. So I'll activate it as well. It's placed at the back of the object, and its main purpose is to separate the background and the subject or the foreground. So I'll go to the top view, then I will just hit G and with this, right? As you move it, I think it's fine. There's not much I'm going to change. Maybe I'll make the power, let's say 2 instead of 2.5. Then we can turn it on, turn it off. So currently we can't see what it's doing because we don't have materials on our objects. But of course, with your lighting, you can always come back and make changes based on what it is that you want to achieve. So now that we have our lighting, the next thing would be to start the texturing. So I'll just minimize these windows. Okay. Then I'll change my editor to the shader editor. Then I'll select the Lollipop itself and click on new, and I'll change the name to Lollipop. So to work with this, we're first of all going to start with the displacement, right? So with lollipops, usually the surface is always a bit rough, a bit bumpy. So that's what I'm going to start setting up. So I'll hit Shift A, and basically for those surface imperfections, surface displacements, we are going to make use of a bunch of noise texture nodes. So the first one I'll use is the Voronoi texture, and I'll hit Ctrl T so that I can bring up the texture coordinate and the mapping. So ensure that the texture node is selected, then you hit Ctrl T to get this. The reason I'm using Ctrl T, or the reason I'm able to use Ctrl T, is because under Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, I have the Node Wrangler add-on active. So if you hit on Ctrl T but then you don't get anything, that could be you have this add-on either off or it's not installed. So you need to install it. So then I'll hit Ctrl-Shift to preview the Voronoi texture. Then I'll change the texture coordinate projection. So I don't want it to use any generated UV. I want it to kind of project, or rather have the texture be projected on the object. So I'll click on the object option and direct it to the vector. Then, of course, what we're seeing kind of disappears. So we need to go to the Voronoi texture. And in here, we're going to change the F1 to distance to edge. Then I'll adjust the scale. So 5 is quite small, so we're not seeing anything. So I'll use like a crazy value. So I could use, let's say, 250 and hit enter. And then we are going to start seeing something. Then I can start reducing it. So let's say maybe 100. Be lower. Let's do is it like 50? So now that the scale is 50, we can try to reduce it further, but I think 50 is fine if I just look around, right? So this is what is going to drive the cracks that appear in some lollipops. So I'll hit Shift A and I will add a color ramp. And then I just want to use the color ramp to add contrast. So with this white part, the white stop, I'll drag it back or towards the black one. So something like that. Then whether this is too clean in terms of like the part itself. So I would like to introduce a bit of distortion, right? And here in the Voronoi texture, we don't have like a distortion option. So to add distortion, I'll select these two and just move them. I'll hit G. Then I'll hit Shift A and then I'll add a noise. So what I want to do is I want to use a noise texture, and I want this noise texture to introduce a bit of distortion to this. So instead of directing this mapping node directly to the vector, I want us to mix these two together, and then that result will feed it to the vector. Then we are going to have a bit of distortion for the noise, that is the Voronoi texture. So I'll hit Shift A and I'll add a mapping node for the noise texture itself. And then I will use the object output, connect it to this mapping, this vector output to the vector input, the noise. Okay. Then I'll hit Shift A and we'll add a mix. So I'll add a mix color. And I'll connect this vector output for the mapping to the A input. And then the factor output to the B input. I want to preview the noise and I want to adjust its scale. So let's say put 100. Let's do 250, something like that, right? Then I want these results to be directed to the vector. So I'll click on this result output, connect it to the vector. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm using the clean coordinates from the object, and then I'm mixing them with a noise texture. And then that result, we are feeding it to the Voronoi texture. So now if I preview the color ramp, so Ctrl-Shift click, this is what we have. And it kind of looks like it's a bit messy, but the thing is, I don't want this to be too much. I want it to be subtle. So I'll input a really tiny value, so maybe 0.001. And you can notice now that this kind of is distorted a bit. So we're not using it too much, or we're not using a value that's too high. Okay, or you can try 0.3 maybe, but that now becomes a bit much. So 0.15 would be okay. So if you compare how this was before, so if I direct the mapping directly to the Voronoi, it's a clean. But if I direct the mix to the Voronoi, we get a bit more distortion. And that's the target of this setup here, right? So we are mixing the default values, so the default position, rotation, and scale together with the noise. So we're using the noise to kind of create the distortion, right? Then another thing I'd like to do is, this is too perfect. Like if we fed this to a displacement, it would be too perfect. So one of the things I'd like to do is, this selected, don't even select this, it's not a must. So I'll just hit Shift A and then we'll search for displacement. Okay. Then I want to direct this color ramp to, if I zoom in, I want to direct it to the height, and then I want to direct the displacement to the displacement of the material output. So now if I preview it, so if I connect this principled BSDF to the surface, this is what we have, and it actually doesn't look good. So what we need to do is we need to go to the options, and under settings, look for displacement. On displacement, instead of bump only, choose displacement and bump, and then we'll get an even more crazier result. Then now in the displacement node, I can come in and adjust the scale. So I'll use a value lower than 0.01, so I could use 0.005. Still a bit much. Let's do 1. It's there, but it's not perfect. Let's do 2.5, right? So if I preview this, you can see that the result we're getting is not that good. So I can come in here and push this further, make this tighter, like that. Okay. So you could make it tighter. We wanted it like to be really sharp, something like that. Okay. Then with this, it's too perfect if you look at it. So this is not what I would intend for it to look like. So let's fix this. So I want certain areas to have the cracks, and then some should not have the cracks, right? So we're going to introduce a new noise. So we could organize this. So I could kind of group this. So I'll select that, Shift P, I'll hit F2, and I'll call this like cracks distortion. Okay. Just to have it be on its own, it's less confusing. And then these are the cracks. So you could rename this. You could select it, hit F2, and then call it cracks. And then of course we have the color ramp that's adding contrast to this. So I'm going to hit Shift A, and we're going to add a noise texture. Then I'll create a mapping node for this, and I'll direct this object to the mapping, then this vector output to the vector input of the noise. Control Shift click, preview. Let's start with 50. Let's do 150, and then I'll hit Shift A, and then I'll add a color ramp. So now I want to actually make I want the noise to be like chunks of white and black. Okay. So something like that. Then I want to combine this noise and this, and then the result of this two, we can feed it to the displacement. So the reason I have this noise is because I don't want to have the cracks be predictable or all over, right? I want maybe the crack to get somewhere here, then stop, then it begins elsewhere, something like that. So I'll hit Shift A and then add a mix, and I'll choose a mix color, and then I'll connect the color from the first color ramp, color from the second color ramp, and then we can preview. So Control Shift. Then what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to change the blending mode from mix to lighten. And you'll notice now that we have areas that are darker than others. So to add even more contrast to this, we can add a color ramp after this. So Shift A, color ramp, then connect it after this mix. And then we can add more contrast. So if I wanted more white, right? So something like that. Okay. So now we have the cracks, but they're not predictable. And this is what is breaking up that predictability. So we mix it with the color ramp, and then we change the Voronoi texture, and then we change the blending mode to lighten, but also add wax and screen as well. So either of those three. So lighten, screen, and add, they're going to work. Okay. Then we'll fit this. So we'll fit this color to the height. And then now you can select this, hit G to move them, then connect this to here. So now you'll see what we have, right? So then if you want to introduce a bit more variation to this, you can come in here and play with the rotation. That is in the Voronoi, for the mapping node for the Voronoi texture, not for the noise, for the Voronoi, because that's what would change the rotation node for the Voronoi. So if I adjust this, not the scale, because the scale will mess it up. So if I adjust this, you can get different results, right? So I'll take them back to 0. And then I'll add a value node. So Shift A, value, and I'll use it to adjust on all axes. So I'll connect this value to rotation. Then now if I adjust the value, we can get different results, right? You can also do the same for any of these mapping nodes, depending on what you want it to affect. So you can not only constrain it to the mapping node that controls the Voronoi, you can do it for the others as well. So this helps you to kind of adjust the type of variation that you have, right? Then of course, you can come to the Voronoi and you can adjust the scale. And of course, you'll get different things, but I found that staying between 50 and 55 works fine for me. Then once we have that, the setup for the surface displacement is done. So this is how I've introduced the cracks. But of course, this is not like the final thing, because we have to introduce a bit of surface bump. And then we also have to introduce some dots, because the surface is not perfect. So we have to introduce some dots as well. So there's still much that needs to be done for this particular setup. So when it comes to the color, I'll use a noise. So noise, and again, a color ramp. Then I'll let it have its own mapping and texture coordinate node, but you can extract it, or you can use this one as well. But let me just create a new one. So Control T. Then I will change this to object, that is the texture coordinate. And then I'll preview the texture. I'll increase the scale. So let's say 150. I want it to be smaller than this. So let's say 350. And then I'll connect this factor to the factor of the color ramp. And then I can preview the color ramp. Then I can set up the color. So I want the Lollipop to be, let's say, red, purple, green, whatever. You can choose whatever you like, right? So I'll click on this, stop. I'll increase the value. Then I'll choose red. Okay. Then I'll go to this other stop, double click on the color, click on the eyedropper, pick this red. Then for the stop that is on the left, I'll select it, then I'll make the color darker, right? Then I'll connect this to the base color of the principled BSDF. Then I can click Ctrl Shift so that the principled BSDF is connected to the surface. So this is what we have. It's not much, but it's something, right? So let me move this up, move this as well. So this is the color, right? So we can group it. So Shift P, F2, Lollipop color. Then I need to introduce some surface displacement other than this, right? So some bump. So I'll hit Shift A and then I'll add a bump node. Okay. And I want this bump node to be driven by a noise. So we can duplicate this noise or we can create a new one. So let me create a new one, noise texture. Then I'll connect this vector to the vector of the noise, and then this factor to the height. Then I can preview this noise and I'll set up, let's say 400, maybe 600. Then we can preview the bump, so Ctrl Shift click, see what's happening. Well, this is a bit much if you look at it, so we can reduce the strength. I want it to be even more bumpier, so maybe I could do like 1500, something like that. Then reduce the strength. Okay. Then we can connect this normal output to the normal input of the principled BSDF. Then we can preview. Then I can adjust the strength of the bump, so something like that, right? That is too much, so maybe let me dial it down. Okay. Then the candies, they usually have dots on them, so let me select all of these and just move them down. So they usually have dots on them, so for that we'll make use of the Voronoi. So I'll hit Shift A and then Voronoi texture, connect this to the vector, and then I'll preview this. So Ctrl Shift, I'll increase the scale to 50. I'll hit Shift A and add a color ramp because we want to introduce some contrast. Okay, so we have that, and I'll take this white closer to the black. Then I'll increase the number, let's say 750. Then I'll adjust the detail a bit. And I've noticed that what the detail does is it gives us dots that are some that are very dark and some that are gray. So that's going to create good contrast for the dots. So there are some that are going to be deep, there are some that are going to be shallow based on the black color that we have. So I could do 1200 maybe. And then I'll add another bump. Okay. Then this bump is going to be connected after the first one, and the normal output of the first bump should be connected to the normal input of the second bump. And then this color output is going to be connected to the height. Then we can preview it, so Ctrl Shift. So this is a bit much, so we can reduce the strength to something smaller, maybe something like that. Okay, then we can preview, so Ctrl Shift on the principled BSDF. Then we can adjust the strength again. So yeah, something like that, because I want them to be seen. Okay. Then I can go to, let's say here, make this adjustment, maybe 20, 0. Let's see what 0 gives us. 0 gives us that. So maybe something like that. And then I can increase the scale. But I don't want it to be super crazy. That is the scale for the Voronoi. If I increase it too much, then it becomes kind of crazy in a way. Becomes too much. We can also adjust the scale for the noise as well. That's going to allow us to see different results, right? So if I preview this, so we can get different results. So if I zoom out and control shift on the principal VSDF, okay. So we have our dots, we have our displacement, we have bit of surface bump, but of course this doesn't look like a lollipop, to be honest. So we'll need to push this further. So that would be starting with the roughness, so I can reduce the roughness. Okay, maybe up to that point, because the lollipops are very reflective. Then we can go to subsurface. So under subsurface, we can increase the weight. So we can use, like, let's say 0.1. We don't see a change, but it needs to be like really subtle. We're just allowing some light to just pass through just a bit. So I'll use that. Then when it comes to the radius, so here I'm choosing which color I want to be more prominent. So this is RGB. So this is red, blue, and red, green, and blue, sorry. So here I could say maybe for the red, I want the red to be more prominent, so I can make it like, let's say, 2. It's going to make the red stand out more. Then we have this scale. So the scale is the factor. So whichever value we have here is multiplied by this. So if we have 2, so 2 times 0.05, that's going to be what the red is going to be. 0.2 times this and 0.1 times this. So this is something I could tinker with, or I could leave it out, but I just want it to be there. I don't want it to be too much like that. I want it to be 1. I just want it to be, it's there, but it's really tiny, right? Because if I take it too far, then, well, it kind of starts looking like candy, but I don't want it to be this much, right? But you can experiment. Okay. The other thing we need to play around with is under the specular is fine. We're not going to change anything. We're not going to change the IOR level. We're going to leave it as it is. Under transmission, this is what we want. So the lollipops, they usually allow light to pass through a lot. So we're going to increase the transmission to, let's say, 0.9. But you can take it to 1 if you'd like, but I want it to be, let's say, 0.9. Okay. Another thing that I would like to add is an environment. You don't have an environment, so let's add an environment. So to do that, at the top here, we can change where we change the window or the editor that we're in. Next to that, we have object, so choose world, and then we'll add a map. So I'll hit Shift A, and then I'll search for environment texture. Then I'll hit Control T, so that we get the texture coordinate and the mapping. And then you can connect this color to color. And then I'll load up an image. So I'll go to where I have my HDRI, and I'll select this one, click on open. So these HDRIs, I have downloaded them from Polyhaven. So you can, of course, go to the site, but I'll try and link the image that I used in the description. I'll select it, click on open image. We have an environment, right? So we need to, of course, get rid of the environment itself. We don't want to see it. So I'll change the editor to properties, and then I'll go to the render, and I'll go to film, and I'll turn on transparent. Then I can go back to the shader editor. Then I can reduce the strength. So let's do 0.7. Then I can go back to object from world, right? Then we're not yet done. The other thing I'd like to add is a coat. So a coat is like a top surface that covers the object. So this lollipop. So I'll increase the weight. Say something like that, because without it, that's how it looks like. So I'll increase the weight to, let's say, 0.6. The roughness, I'll leave it really low. But if you increase the roughness, that means that the coat itself becomes more diffuse, becomes more spread out. So I'll leave it as it was, right? Okay. And once we have that, we have our lollipop. So if I get into the camera view, we have our lollipop. We can come in here in the cracks setup, and we can make other adjustments. Like if I wanted, for example, I wanted this to be different, maybe would make it more black. So this creates like deeper cracks. Okay, if you preview it, it will shift. This isn't appealing because it becomes too much in a way. So we need to pinch it back, right? We can play around with the color ramp for the noise. So if you want more cracking, you ramp up the black. Okay. Then you can see the dots quite well. You can further refine this by adjusting, for example, the rotation of the Voronoi. So I could take this to, let's say, maybe something like this, right? Then another thing I could do is, after the color option, I hit Shift A and look for hue saturation value. Then I want to bump the saturation up to the maximum 2, so it becomes even more red. Then for the hue, you can actually use the hue to change the color of your particular lollipop, right? So I'll leave it at 0.5. What I want to change or make adjustments to is my lighting. So I'll change my editor to 3D viewport. And then I want to make a few changes to this. So if I switch to the top view and I move the key, like this is the key light, and I move it, I hit G, you can see you can detect that movement in the reflection, right? So I just want to move them a bit. Okay, then for the back, I want to make it really small, so I'll hit S, scale it down. You see we get this drastic change, right? Now I want to move it far away, so G, Y, move it further back. And then I can go to the settings of this. So let me create a new window. So at the bottom here, once I see the crosshairs, I can click, hold, and drag. And I'll change this to properties. With this light selected, can go to the light settings and I can reduce the power to, let's say, 0.5. If you don't want it to be that hot, because 2 is a bit much, you can see. So 0.5 work fine. Then I can choose to scale it up, maybe increase the power or not. So that's going to be your decision. So I'll leave it at 0.5. Okay. So here when it comes to the key, you can scale it up, move it. The same for this. So I'm looking at the powers for this. So this is fine, right? Then we have to create the material for this. This is the stick. So Lollipop, let's just call it like stick. Okay. So for this, I'll use a noise texture, and I just want it to be white and gray. So I'll hit Ctrl T to bring up the texture coordinate and the mapping. Then I'll switch the texture coordinate output from generated to object, then Ctrl Shift to preview this. By preview, and choose something high like 250. Now hit Shift A, choose a color ramp. Then, of course, if you try to add contrast, you'll see what you have, but you can start adjusting. I want this to be like a gray, the black stop. So I'll make it into like a gray, like so. Then I'll connect it to the base color. Okay. Then I want to have like subtle bump. So I'll hit Shift A, search for bump, connect it to normal. And then I can use this noise and connect it to the height of the bump. Then you can see by preview, it's a bit much. So what you can do, you can reduce the strength. Okay. And I can preview, Control Shift. So it doesn't have like a huge influence in regards to color. It's just white and gray. And then of course I'll make it more diffuse, because I want it to be like those paper sticks, because some of these candies, they come with like a paper stick. So I wanted to have that paper stick that is very diffuse, so the roughness be quite low. Oh, sorry, quite high, not even quite low. So I'll use 0.7. Okay. If I get to the camera view, so this is what we have. You can still select the texture for the shader for the lollipop and make your changes, right? So you can play around with that. You can come in, adjust the factor. So you can do 0.003. See what you get. Adjust the scale, right? So the higher the scale, the more the cracks are going to be. So if you want it to be those candies that look like they've gone through something, you can increase that. Okay. Then adjust this value for the rotation to get different results. Okay. So we have our lollipop, right? So we started with the displacement first, then we worked with the color, then we came and added the surface bump, then we added the dots. So for the dots, you can increase the strength further, but not too much. Like if you feel you're not seeing it enough from a distance, you can increase that, right? You can come in the hue saturation value node. My saturation is 2 because I want it to be really, really red. And then the hue, you can change it, and that changes the color of your lollipop, right? So that's how you set up the shader for the lollipop.